The day she was told to leave, Diana Mitchell had never planned for that morning to become a defining moment in her life, let alone in the history of her company. She had woken up just like she did every morning before the sun, with the quiet stillness of her penthouse apartment barely disturbed as she slipped out of bed and walked barefoot across the polished hardwood floors to the small wooden box on her dresser. Inside was a tarnished silver bracelet, simple, worn, unremarkable to most, but to her it was priceless. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had cleaned houses for a living, raised 3 kids alone, and taught Diana the kind of strength that couldn't be bought. That bracelet was her ritual. She wore it every single day, even when she was surrounded by gemstones worth more than most homes. It reminded her of who she was before the magazines, before the Forbes lists, before the empire she'd built from scratch. That morning, as she slid it onto her wrist, she had no idea that it would become the very symbol of what was about to unfold. After dressing in her signature navy blue suit and pulling her natural curls into a neat bun, Diana grabbed the keys to her 2003 Honda Civic, yes, still that same car, and headed out. Her assistant had offered to schedule a driver, of course, offered her options of luxury SUVs and tinted window town cars, but Diana always refused. That old Civic, with its worn-out leather and a temperamental AC unit, had seen her through years of struggle. It was her badge of honor. She pulled out of the underground garage, merging onto the freeway under soft morning light, already planning her unannounced visit to one of her stores. That was her habit-random drop-ins. She never gave notice. She didn't want red carpets rolled out or fake smiles. She wanted the truth. How were her employees treating customers when they thought the boss wasn't watching? Were the values she built luminous designs upon still alive in her people? She picked Beverly Hills. It was her flagship store, the crown jewel of the brand. Located on Rodeo Drive, this wasn't just a jewelry store, it was an experience. Custom lighting designed to make diamonds sparkle like stars, velvet-lined walls in a champagne tone, private lounges with soft jazz playing, and staff trained not only in gemstones but in grace. Celebrities shopped there. Foreign royalty sent assistance for bespoke orders. The store brought in over $2 million a month. Diana had designed every inch of it herself. She knew the scent of the candles they used, the angle of the spotlights, even the placement of each display case. It was, in many ways, the heart of her empire. And she was proud of it. She parked her Civic in front of the store. The valet looked confused, even hesitant, but she simply handed him the keys with a polite smile. He hesitated, no luxury badge, no tinted windows, but took them anyway. Diana adjusted her blazer and walked in. Immediately, she noticed the subtle classical music playing overhead and the faint scent of white tea and cedar. Everything was as it should be, except for one small thing. A display case was crooked, slightly. Most wouldn't have noticed. But she did. Still, she said nothing. She walked forward with the calm confidence of a woman who belonged there because she did. Yet as she approached the most exclusive section of the store, something happened that shifted the entire atmosphere. A woman stepped in her path. Tall, poised, blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun, dressed in designer heels and pearls that didn't belong to the store. This was Patricia Whitman, the store manager. Diana knew of her, of course. Background in luxury retail, spotless references, charming on paper. Patricia greeted her with a smile, but it was tight, calculated, the kind that tried to look warm but couldn't hide the judgment behind it. "Good morning," she said, her voice clipped like a champagne glass. "Can I help you with something today?" Diana returned the smile. "Yes, I'd love to see the Aurora collection." Patricia blinked, just once, but it was enough. Her whole demeanor shifted by a fraction. "Ah," she said slowly, her eyes flicking down to Diana's shoe sensible, scuffed then to her plain purse. "Well, those are our premium pieces. They start at $200,000. Diana's smile didn't fade. "I understand. I'd still like to see them." There was a pause, just a breath. But in that pause, something unspoken passed between them. Patricia didn't believe Diana belonged there. She had already decided. The blazer, the shoes. The fact that Diana hadn't arrived in a luxury car, all of it, had been used to write a story about her in Patricia's mind. And it was the wrong story. Still, Patricia didn't outright say no. She just gestured stiffly and led Diana to the display and enthusiastically. She hovered, made no effort to explain the pieces, didn't offer a seat or even a brochure. The display case remained locked. Diana waited. "I'd like to see the necklace," she said, pointing to the centerpiece of the Aurora collection. Patricia hesitated, then opened the case reluctantly, moving as if each action cost her something. Diana leaned in, her trained eye instantly noting the cut, the clarity, even the prong settings. Colombian origin? She asked casually. Patricia's mouth twitched. "Yes," she said, clearly surprised. Most people couldn't identify that. "How did you—" "The clarity is excellent," Diana continued, though the setting could be tightened. "One prong is slightly uneven." Now, Patricia was frowning. She didn't like this. She didn't like this woman who looked ordinary knowing so much. Instead of engaging, she shifted her tone. "These pieces require serious financial commitment," she said, her smile now replaced with a warning edge. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with some of our fashion pieces?" Diana's jaw tightened, still calm, still polite. "I like to purchase the necklace." Patricia blinked. Then she laughed, not a polite laugh, a dismissive one. "I'll need to see proof of funds," she said, folding her arms. Diana stood straighter. "Is that your standard policy for everyone?" "Yes," Patricia lied, not even glancing at the couple across the room, longtime clients, who were being handed glasses of champagne without question as they browsed pieces 3 times the value of the Aurora necklace. Diana said nothing. She had heard enough. The calm inside her was beginning to freeze, turning into something colder, sharper, more dangerous. She wasn't just a customer. She was the architect of the very store. She was being told to leave, and Patricia was about to learn that. The bracelet and the breaking point, the air in the store had shifted. It wasn't loud, not yet. There hadn't been raised voices, nor slamming doors, nor even any screaming, but still, it had changed. There was a weight in the air now, like something sacred had been disturbed. The music still played softly in the background, a classical melody that tried to smooth over the tension hanging between the two women. Diana's face had remained calm, but something beneath her skin had gone still and cold, not angry. No, not yet, but alert, calculating, ready. She had been through worse, far worse than this. And unlike Patricia, she didn't need to scream to show strength. Patricia, meanwhile, stood with crossed arms and thinly veiled disdain, unaware of just how close she was to ruining not just her day but her entire career. "Proof of funds," she repeated, her voice flat. "Credit card, bank statement, just something that shows you're serious." Diana slowly reached into her purse, not for a card or bank slip, but for her phone, not trembling, not flustered. Just steady, measured. Her fingers brushed the silver bracelet on her wrist for a moment before wrapping around the phone like it was a blade. She'd kept sheathed long enough. Patricia saw the phone and rolled her eyes. "If you're going to start recording me, I can have you removed." "I'm not recording," Diana said, voice cool as polished steel. "I'm calling the board." The word board didn't register at first. Patricia blinked, confusion flashing across her face. "What board?" Diana didn't answer. She was already dialing. Across the store, Ashley Chun had paused mid-task. She'd been rearranging the pearl sets when she heard the words. "Call the board?" She turned slightly, glancing over her shoulder just in time to see the expression on Diana's face shift from polite inquiry to commanding presence. Ashley's eyes widened. Something about the woman's tone, her poise, her confidence, it triggered a memory, a photograph, a company newsletter, a headline. CEO Spotlight. Building dreams one store at a time. She fumbled her phone from her pocket, pulled up the Luminous Designs newsletter, and tapped furiously until the screen lit up with the familiar face she now realized was standing 15 feet away from her. Meanwhile, Kevin Torres, the assistant manager, had also stopped. His pen hovered in midair above the sales log. He had sensed the change in atmosphere but hadn't dared interfere. Now he watched Patricia carefully, trying to piece together what was happening. Patricia, still clueless, scoffed, "You're calling your board? What are you, some kind of investor?" But Diana wasn't answering her anymore. "Sarah," she said into the phone, her voice suddenly all business. "Yes, it's Diana. Emergency call? I need the entire board on Zoom in 10 minutes. I'll explain everything." Silence fell over the room like a wave. The few customers, still browsing, stopped mid-step. One even paused with a necklace in hand, frozen like a character in a paused film. The older couple, the Blackstones, had now turned fully to watch, their interest no longer in the diamonds, but in the storm that was gathering in front of them. Patricia stared at Diana, eyebrows furrowed. "Diana, what?" That's when Ashley, trembling slightly, took a few steps forward and whispered to Kevin, "That's her. That's Diana Mitchell, the Diana Mitchell." Kevin's face lost all color. He'd heard the name 100 times. Every employee had company emails, training videos, quarterly reports. It was everywhere. Diana Mitchell wasn't just the CEO, she was the founder, the owner, the woman whose vision had built this empire. And Patricia had just accused her of theft, mocked her, and tried to have her escorted out of her own store. Kevin stepped out from behind the counter, trying to signal Patricia with his eyes, but she was too wrapped up in her own arrogance to see the panic rising in her assistant manager's face. Diana ended her call and looked directly at Patricia. "I've just requested an emergency meeting with the board of directors. While we wait, perhaps you'd like to explain to everyone here why you denied service to a customer, demanded proof of funds, and attempted to remove her from the premises without cause." Patricia swallowed. "Wait, you're Diana? That Diana?" Diana didn't answer immediately. She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out a single white business card, and held it up with 2 fingers like it was a badge. "Diana Mitchell," she said clearly, "founder, chief executive officer. Luminous Designs." There was no more music in the store. Or maybe there was, but no one heard it. All they heard was the quiet crash of Patricia's pride folding into itself. The woman who had strutted through the store all morning, confident in her assumed authority, now looked like a porcelain doll with cracks forming across every inch of her face. Diana took a slow step forward. "When I built this company," she said, her voice still composed, "I told myself that every customer, every single one, would walk into a Luminous Design store and be treated like they mattered. I built this brand because I was tired of being judged by my skin, by my clothes, by the car I drive. And today, Patricia, you made the mistake of turning my worst memory into someone else's lived experience." Patricia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ashley was crying now, not from fear, but from awe. Kevin had stopped breathing. Even Marcus, the security guard by the door, had his arms crossed tightly, his jaw locked. No one moved, no one interrupted, because they all knew they were no longer witnessing a retail incident. They were witnessing a reckoning. Patricia finally spoke, her voice smaller than it had been all day. I didn't know." That's the problem," Diana said, her eyes sharp as glass. "You didn't care to." The phone in Diana's hand buzzed. The board was ready. She lifted it slowly, her voice changing back into the one every executive at the top of the company had learned to obey without hesitation. "Good morning," she said into the speaker. "This is Diana. I'm standing in the Beverly Hills flagship. I've just been denied service, insulted, and threatened with removal. The manager on duty assumed I couldn't afford my own merchandise. She discriminated against me in front of staff and customers. Yes, I have witnesses. Yes, the cameras are recording. I'll be recommending immediate termination and a full review of store policy enforcement procedures." Patricia gasped. "Please, Diana, please. I didn't know who you were, but you knew who you thought I was," Diana cut in quietly. "And that was enough for you to decide I didn't deserve to be here." Patricia's knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her perfect posture finally broken. "I didn't mean to I just thought." "You thought wrong?" Diana said, her voice like iron cloaked in velvet. "And now you're going to learn that actions have consequences." The price of assumptions. Patricia Whitman stood frozen in place, the polished floor beneath her heels suddenly feeling as unsteady as water. The board meeting Diana had initiated was already underway virtually, yes, but its consequences were very real and rapidly unfolding in the physical space around her. The weight of every word Diana had just spoken was sinking in. Every syllable had been like a hammer, and with each blow, Patricia felt the carefully constructed illusion of her authority cracking wide open. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her throat tight, her skin clammy. Just moments ago, she had been the queen of the store, confident and in control, judging customers with her eyes and filtering them with her assumptions. Now she stood exposed and stripped of every ounce of that assumed power, laid bare before customers, employees, and the very woman who had created the kingdom she had so carelessly ruled. Diana ended the board call calmly and tucked her phone away, not with triumph, but with restraint. Her expression was not one of victory, it was one of mourning. Mourning for what her store had become when placed in the hands of someone who had forgotten the mission. The store had been built to be a space of elegance and inclusion, a place where excellence wasn't tied to race, accent, car brand, or wardrobe. And yet here they were, the founder of the company being treated like an intruder because of a blazer too modest, a car too humble, and a skin tone that made others suspicious before they ever asked her name. Diana turned to face the customers, her presence so commanding that every head lifted to meet her gaze. "I want to sincerely apologize to all of you," she said, her voice warm but carrying a quiet storm. "What happened here today is not who we are. It is not who I am, and it is not what this store stands for. I built Luminous Designs to be more than just a place to buy fine jewelry. I built it to be a space where dignity meets luxury, where no one has to prove their worth to be seen." Her words hung in the air like chimes struck by wind, sharp, honest, and echoing far beyond the store's marble floors. One by one, the customers began to lower their phones. Not because the moment was over, but because they realized the story was changing. This wasn't a viral clip anymore. This was a lesson. A moment in time they would one day tell others about, not just because they witnessed drama, but because they had seen truth delivered without malice, justice served without cruelty. Kevin Torres, the assistant manager, stood at the back of the room, heart pounding. For months, he had followed Patricia's lead quietly, questioning some of her decisions, sometimes watching in discomfort as she dismissed customers with backhanded compliments or subtle redirections. He had told himself that maybe she was just detail-oriented, maybe just cautious, but deep down, he'd known there had been something else at work, something darker, and now it was undeniable. Yet he also knew one more thing: he could no longer stay silent. He stepped forward, clearing his throat nervously. "Miss Mitchell," he began, voice slightly trembling but sincere, "I didn't know it was you, but I knew something was wrong today. I should have stepped in sooner." Diana turned her eyes to Kevin, not harshly, not accusingly, but with the kind of look a teacher gives a student who's just found their courage. "And yet you did step in," she said. "That matters, especially now." Ashley Chun had tears glistening in her eyes. She couldn't bring herself to speak, but the look on her face said enough. Diana gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. "And you," she said gently, "you remembered our core promise to see the customer, not judge." The moment was interrupted by the quiet clearing of a throat. It was Marcus, the security guard, his towering presence now more grounded than ever. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "when Patricia asked me to remove you, I paused because it didn't feel right. I've been in rooms like this before. I've seen this play out too many times. But I promised myself, no matter the uniform, I'd never follow an order that didn't sit right with my conscience." Diana smiled. "And that's why you'll always have a place in this company." Patricia's voice cracked from behind the counter. She hadn't moved. Her perfectly tailored blazer was wrinkled now, her hair coming undone, the image of poise and polish replaced by raw panic. "Please," she said, stepping forward slowly, her hands raised like she was surrendering. I didn't mean to offend you. I didn't know who you were. Diana turned her body to face her fully. The store fell silent once again. And if I weren't the CEO, Diana asked, if I were just a regular woman shopping for a gift, would you have treated me any differently? Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it again. She had no answer. Because they both knew the truth. You judged me the moment I walked in? Diana continued, her voice even. You looked at my skin, my shoes, my car, and you made a decision about who I was and what I could afford? And then you acted on that decision without facts, without dignity, without grace. Patricia's voice was trembling now. I worked hard to represent this brand well. I care about this store. No, Diana said, her tone turning colder. You cared about maintaining a certain image. An image that didn't include people who looked like me unless they were accompanied by a celebrity or wearing a designer badge. You cared about your own comfort, not the values this company was founded on, the door chimed again. A courier entered and froze at the sight of the silent room. Kevin motioned him toward the back quickly, allowing the tension in the room to remain undisturbed. Diana took a deep breath, then reached into her purse and pulled out a file. It was thick, bound, and stamped with the luminous designs corporate. Seal, this, she said, lifting the file for Patricia in the room to see, is a training manual, a copy of our official company ethics code. Every employee receives one. In this manual, on page 3, are the core values we promise to uphold: dignity, fairness, excellence, and respect. Today you violated every one of them. Patricia's eyes followed the movement of the folder like it was a sword being unsheathed. Please, she whispered again, don't ruin me. I'm not ruining you, Diana replied. You did that yourself. And then, with the quiet formality of someone delivering a court judgment, she said the words that changed everything. You're terminated. Effective immediately, Patricia staggered backward a step. Her legs gave out and she sat hard on one of the chairs, the same plush seats she had offered to the wealthy couple earlier. But no glass of champagne came with it. No curated experience. Only shame. The weight of every decision she had made finally crashing down on her. But Diana wasn't finished yet. She turned back to Kevin. You're promoted. You'll serve as acting store manager, effective today, Kevin gasped. My single quotes M. I'm honored. Don't be honored, Diana said, her smile returning faintly. Be accountable. Uphold. What I built, protect what matters. Ashley stared at her, stunned, unable to speak. Diana turned to her. You too, Ashley. As of now, your assistant manager? Ashley's eyes filled with tears again. I don't know what to say. Let your work say it, Diana said softly. As Marcus stood at the edge of the scene. Silent and composed, Diana walked toward him and offered her hand. And you, she said, are getting a raise. You showed integrity in a hard moment. That matters more than any sales number ever could. Marcus took her hand firmly. Thank you, ma'am. And just like that, order began to return to the space. Not the kind built on fear or hierarchy or assumptions, but the kind built on truth, on accountability, on earned respect. Patricia remained in her chair, quietly sobbing, no longer the powerful gatekeeper, but simply a woman learning too late what judgment had cost her. Diana glanced at her one last time. Not with glee, not even with anger, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had waited too long to let injustice slide. This store, Diana said to the room, was built on the memory of every time I was told I didn't belong. And I will not let that memory be corrupted. The legacy that could not be stolen. Patricia remained seated, her hands trembling in her lap, as the reality of her downfall continued to settle around her like a slow, choking fog. The store, once her kingdom of silent judgments and curated perfection, had become a stage where her values were exposed, examined, and ultimately shattered. Every detail of her posture betrayed a woman unraveling, her perfectly ironed blouse now wrinkled from collapse, her shoes misaligned from the frantic shifting of her weight, and her hands still faintly clinging to a false hope that maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding. But deep inside, even she knew it wasn't. She hadn't just misjudged a customer. She had misjudged the soul of the brand she had been entrusted to uphold. Diana, meanwhile, stood quietly by the Aurora display case, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared at the necklace Patricia had once guarded so jealously. It sparkled under the lights, flawless, precise, a thing of beauty, but now it carried a new meaning. It had become the centerpiece of a moment where dignity had been tested and reclaimed. The irony wasn't lost on Diana. The very piece she had been denied had become the silent witness to the restoration of everything she'd spent her life building. Kevin, now acting manager, cleared his throat from the counter. "Miss Mitchell," he said cautiously, "do you want us to close the store for the rest of the day?" Diana turned, her voice steady and composed. "No," she said. "We stay open. People don't learn from perfection. They learn from truth. And today this store is full of it." Ashley was still standing in shock, her new role swirling in her mind like a whirlwind she wasn't prepared for. Diana walked over to her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need to prove yourself," she said. "You've already done it. You showed kindness when it wasn't expected. You saw a human being where someone else saw a threat. That's leadership." Ashley nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes again. "Thank you," she whispered. And then, without fanfare, Diana turned back to Patricia, who still hadn't moved. "You have 5 minutes to collect your things," she said gently but firmly. "I won't have you escorted out like a criminal. But I also won't allow you to linger here like a victim. You made a choice, and now you face the result." Patricia rose unsteadily to her feet. Her hands shook as she reached behind the counter, retrieving a small bag she had kept in the storage drawer. The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't tense, it was cleansing. There was a quiet dignity in the way the staff watched, not out of cruelty or vengeance, but as witnesses to accountability. Justice didn't need to humiliate. It simply needed to be seen. As Patricia slowly packed her few personal belongings, lip balm, a framed photo of her dog, a notebook filled with sales reports, she paused at the mirror behind the counter. She barely recognized the woman staring back. The carefully constructed image was gone. What remained was someone broken not just by consequences, but by the mirror of truth. Before she left, she turned to Diana one last time, her voice cracked. "I know there's nothing I can say to fix this, but I am sorry, truly." Diana held her gaze, then gave a small nod. "I believe you. But being sorry isn't the same as being right." Patricia turned and walked toward the front door. As she reached it, she stopped briefly and looked over her shoulder. "You've built something incredible here," she said quietly. "I just wasn't worthy of it." And with that, she opened the door and stepped outside into the blinding light of Beverly Hills, into a future that no longer included the empire she had failed to protect. The door clicked shut behind her. For the first time in a long while, the store felt open, real, honest. Diana took a deep breath, then turned to face the rest of the team. "Let's talk about what comes next," she said, her voice regaining the warmth that had been temporarily buried beneath steel. "This isn't just about punishment, it's about rebuilding. It's about remembering why we started." Kevin stepped closer. "How do we begin?" Diana smiled faintly. "By remembering who we serve? Our customers come to us for more than diamonds. They come for moments, proposals, anniversaries, new beginnings, and they trust us with those moments. We can't afford to make anyone feel small." The entire team nodded. Even Marcus, stoic and disciplined, let a rare flicker of emotion cross his face. In that moment, they weren't just employees. They were stewards of a mission far larger than commissions or quotas. One of the customers, an elderly woman with silver curls and a soft expression, approached slowly. "Miss Mitchell," she said kindly, "I watched the whole thing. I just wanted to say I've shopped here for years. And today I saw more beauty in your integrity than in any jewel." Diana bowed her head respectfully. "Thank you, ma'am." "That means more than you know," the woman smiled. "You remind me of my mother. Strong, graceful, the kind of woman who didn't need a crown to be royalty." Diana's smile grew deeper, touched by something unspoken. "That's the kind of legacy I want to leave." Suddenly, phones buzzed all at once. Ashley's, Kevin's, even Marcus's. They glanced down to see push notifications flooding in local news outlets, social media clips, hashtags trending. The videos that customers had captured had already gone viral. The headline across one screen read, "CEO denied service in her own store, fires manager on the spot." Kevin looked alarmed. "Do you want us to issue a statement?" "No," Diana said calmly. "Let the world see what happened. Let them see what it looks like when truth wins." A few customers clapped. Not a standing ovation, but a soft, respectful applause. Not for a performance, but for authenticity, for courage. For a moment that reminded them all that, behind the glass and gold, behind the velvet ropes and million-dollar displays, there was a woman who had not forgotten her roots. Diana walked back to the display that had started it all. The crooked glass case, the Aurora necklace. She bent down slightly and adjusted it just a hair to the left. Perfect now. Aligned, restored. "It's not about what you wear," she said quietly to Kevin, who stood nearby. "It's about what you carry. Integrity, kindness, the strength to stand up even when it's hard." Kevin swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I understand now." Diana looked around one last time and said, "Then let's get back to work." And just like that, life inside the flagship store of Luminous Designs began to move again, not with rush, not with panic, but with purpose. With pride. Because today they hadn't just sold jewelry, they had shown the world what it meant to shine. When the world found out by the time Diana left the Beverly Hills store that afternoon, the sun was already dipping low against the golden skyline. Her Civic, parked humbly beside polished Bentleys and Range Rovers, had become the most recognizable car on Rodeo Drive. Cameras had begun to gather across the street, local reporters, curious influencers, and even a few tourists who had somehow already recognized her from the videos spreading like wildfire online. The world had found out. And the story was no longer just a quiet confrontation in a jewelry store. It had become a movement, a mirror, a moment that sparked conversations across dinner tables, newsrooms, and boardrooms alike. By 5 p.m., every major news outlet had picked up the headline. Black CEO denied service in her own store, responds with grace and power. Talk shows were already booking experts to discuss what it meant for representation in luxury retail. Social media feeds were flooded with commentary, most praising Diana's calm and powerful response, while others used the moment to reflect on the subtle ways discrimination still lived beneath polished surfaces. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Diana Mitchell. Hashtag Grace over hate. You never know who you read. Talking to Dot in her office high above downtown Los Angeles, Diana sat quietly at her desk. She wasn't scrolling Twitter. She wasn't watching the news. She was reading a letter from a 17-year-old girl in Atlanta. It had been emailed through the contact page of the Luminous Designs website just minutes earlier. The girl's name was Lena, and her message was simple but powerful. "Miss Mitchell, I saw what happened today. I watched you stand your ground without yelling or falling apart. I saw you speak with pride and calm when they tried to humiliate you. I've always been afraid of being judged for how I look. I'm not anymore, because I saw what it looks like to be powerful without shouting. Thank you for showing me I belong too." Diana sat back in her chair, the weight of that message settling in her chest like warm light. She had faced worse in her life: poverty, rejection, rooms where people talked around her instead of to her. She had known what it felt like to be invisible. But moments like this, when a young woman halfway across the country saw herself reflected in Diana's strength, this was what made every battle worth it. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her assistant, Mariah. "CNN wants you for an interview tonight," Mariah said. "So does CBS, and Good Morning America just reached out for tomorrow morning." Diana sighed, not from exhaustion, but from deep understanding. "Let's do CBS tonight and hold off on everything else. I want to speak, but I want to speak with clarity, not for headlines. For purpose." "Understood," Mariah said, voice full of respect. Back at the Beverly Hills store, Kevin had just finished reviewing staff protocols and was emailing HR about the changes that would need to take place immediately. Ashley was at the customer lounge, walking a newly engaged couple through their purchase, smiling, confident, alive in her new role. Marcus stood by the entrance, not as a bouncer but as a silent symbol of wisdom, wearing a calm vigilance that said he was watching over the values Diana had just defended. The store felt different now. Not less elegant, more. The elegance had always been in the design, but now it was in the people too. The staff had been given more than promotions, they had been handed trust. They knew the world was watching, but they also knew their own. Eyes mattered more. Each customer who entered wasn't just seen as a buyer. They were treated like the person Diana once was, someone with a story, someone worthy of dignity. Inside the corporate offices, HR was flooded with resumes. Not from people looking for scandal, but from people inspired to work for a company that had taken a stand, that had chosen values over silence, that had shown the world that excellence didn't come from arrogance, it came from compassion, from courage, from the decision to protect those who were often overlooked. Diana stepped onto the rooftop of her office building just before her interview. The LA skyline stretched wide before her glass towers glowing orange in the dusk, palm trees swaying in gentle winds. She held a warm cup of green tea in her hand, the scent rising like memory. Around her wrist, her grandmother's bracelet caught the last sliver of sun. She thought about all the rooms she had once been ignored in, meetings where she had been spoken over, investors who had smiled politely but declined to fund her, customers who had demanded to see someone more experienced, assistants who had treated her like she didn't belong. And yet she had never shouted, never thrown fists, never exploded. She had built instead, brick by brick, choice by choice, value by value. And now, when faced with insult, she had answered with presence. When faced with exclusion, she had responded by reopening the doors wider than ever before. Later that night on CBS's evening special, Diana sat under bright lights, wearing a navy dress and that same silver bracelet. The host asked her the obvious first question, "Miss Mitchell, how did you stay so calm in the face of such obvious discrimination?" Diana's answer was quiet, but it rippled louder than any microphone ever could. "Because I've been here before. Just in different clothes. I knew the moment I was being judged. I recognized it not with surprise, but with memory. And I knew that if I raised my voice, I would feed their expectations. But if I stood tall, stayed composed, and spoke with truth, I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd defend every woman who's ever been underestimated. Every black entrepreneur who's ever been told, you don't look like the boss. And every young girl watching who needed to see someone respond with grace instead of anger." The host nodded slowly. "Do you think Patricia, the store manager, deserved to be fired?" Diana paused. "I think she deserved to face the consequences of her choices. I didn't fire her to punish her. I let her go to protect the vision of the company I built, a vision that includes everyone, every customer, every employee, every human being." The next morning, messages came in from across the world. A jewelry chain in London pledged to revise their employee training. A designer brand in Tokyo sent her flowers with a handwritten note thanking her for redefining luxury. And in South Africa, a group of teenage girls wore fake silver bracelets to school, calling them Diana bands and declaring that they were their symbol of quiet power. Diana didn't need the headlines. She didn't need the camera clicks or the applause. What she needed, what she fought for, was now alive in people she'd never even met. She didn't build her empire for praise. She built it so that no one would have to walk into a store and be told in subtle ways that they didn't belong. She built it because someone, somewhere, had once looked at her and seen nothing, and she promised the world that she would never do the same. Her name was Diana Mitchell. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the Beverly Hills store, and the world had yet to move on. News anchors still replayed the clip. Social media feeds still buzzed with reactions. Opinion columns dissected every word Diana Mitchell had spoken in that quiet, commanding voice. But for Diana herself, the noise meant little. The real change was never in headlines or hashtags. It was in the subtle, silent shifts that happened in the hearts of people watching. In Chicago, a black woman named Carla opened the doors of her own boutique and found 4 new customers waiting, each of them saying they saw her on the local news and realized they had never once supported a black-owned business. In Dallas, a teenage boy used a quote from Diana's CBS interview in his school essay about courage. In Seattle, a man who had worked in retail for 15 years said it was the first time he'd ever seen someone fire a manager for prejudice. Not profits. But Diana's focus wasn't on the praise. She was thinking about the future. About what came after the spotlight faded. Because she knew the world had a short memory. That moments of outrage burned hot and fast and then disappeared. What mattered to her now wasn't what people thought today. Was what people would still believe tomorrow. She sat quietly at her grandmother's old dining table that Saturday morning, sipping tea, her fingers brushing the familiar edges of the silver bracelet she wore like armor. The bracelet had once symbolized survival. Now it had become something greater. It was a reminder that strength didn't have to shout, that power could be still, and that legacy was made not in the moments people remembered, but in the ones they never saw. Across the table sat her mother, Grace Mitchell, now retired, her eyes sharp and kind, her voice slower with age but filled with wisdom. "You've always carried yourself like your grandmother," she said, watching her daughter with pride. "But this week, you carried us all." Diana smiled softly. "It wasn't planned, I just couldn't let it happen again." "Not in my house," her mother nodded. "I know. And you didn't just stop it, you corrected it. That matters more than you know." Later that afternoon, Diana visited one of the smallest Luminous design stores, located in a quiet strip mall in Oakland. There were no reporters waiting, no crowds, no TV crews. Just a team of 4 employees who were stunned when she walked in. No warning, no entourage. Just Diana in jeans and a cardigan, holding a notepad and wearing a quiet smile. She walked the floor slowly, greeted the staff, asked about their sales goals, their challenges, their customer experiences. She listened, really listened. She didn't mention the viral video. She didn't need to. Her presence said enough. After nearly an hour, she paused by the counter and looked each employee in the eye. "I didn't build this company to prove I could," she said. "I built it because I was tired of being told I couldn't. And now that it's here, I will protect it, not just the brand, but the people inside it. That means you, each of you. You don't just represent diamonds, you represent dignity." One of the employees, a shy young man named Raymond, spoke up. "Miss Mitchell," he said, "I want to thank you for what you did in Beverly Hills. I've been followed around in stores before, watched, treated like a thief. But when I saw you stand there and not flinch, it reminded me I don't have to shrink to make others comfortable." Diana walked around the counter and hugged him without hesitation. "You never did," she said. "You just needed someone to say it out loud." That evening, she returned home, removed her shoes, and sat on the floor of her living room with a journal in her lap. It was leather-bound, the pages filled with sketches of jewelry designs and old business plans, some crossed out, some circled, some scribbled over with frustration. She turned to the back where she kept personal notes, reflections, quotes, reminders of why she started. She picked up her pen and wrote slowly, "Power is not in the crown. It's in the choice to lift others up when you could stand alone. Grace is not weakness. It is control over the fire inside you. And legacy is not the money you make. It's the truth you leave behind." As the ink dried, her phone lit up with one last message before she powered it down. It was from Kevin, a photo of Ashley, now confidently helping a nervous customer try on her first engagement ring. Underneath it, a simple message. She said it was the first time she ever felt like she belonged in a luxury store. "You did that." Diana smiled. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the city, its lights flickering like a constellation of promises not yet fulfilled. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. There would be new challenges, new mistakes, new confrontations. But one thing was certain, no one would ever again mistake her silence for submission. No one would ever again assume she didn't belong, because her name was Diana Mitchell, She had been underestimated, dismissed, judged, and she had answered not with anger, not with revenge, but with dignity. She had fired the manager not to make a statement, but to restore the soul of what she built. And in doing so, she had reminded the world of something it keeps forgetting, that success is not defined by how loud you are. It's defined by how deeply you know who you are, and no one, not judgment, not hate, not even diamonds behind glass could ever take that away.